You are listening to the U.S. of N.A. by Nation Beer, a series of stories about the people and places from every corner of the country who are helping fuel the N.A. beer movement. If you like this episode, please add us to your library in Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you prefer to listen. For more great N.A. stories, including our many beer reviews, visit nationbeer.com. Interested in getting free samples while helping the non-alcoholic movement grow even further? Then consider joining IRL Nation, our new sampler platform pairing great food and beverage brands with great people ready to share them in real life. Join and share through groups and clubs you belong to, or just as a solo sampler. Signing up is quick, easy, and free. Go to nation.beer for more information and to join today. Welcome to the U.S. of N.A. I'm your host, John Eggleton, Chief Optimist and Principal at Nation Beer. Today on the show, we're going to be talking with Brian Crawford, President and CEO of the Beer Institute, which sounds like it should be a laboratory where they're testing out never-before-seen IPAs and sours, but in actuality is a national trade association for the beer industry. They do the important work of representing breweries and the employees that rely on them before Congress, state legislatures, and public forums across the country. Their board members include executives from Anheuser-Busch, Molson Coors, and Heineken, among others. On this show, we've had the privilege of talking with people from all over the non-alcoholic category, and we were excited to bring a different perspective in this episode. In our conversation, we first talk about the growth of non-alcoholic beer and how the Beer Institute views the category within the overall industry as health habits and drinking preferences are evolving. It's been a challenging environment for many in the craft sector of late. We then spend time talking about the hemp-infused beverage market, which has really taken the country by storm the past couple of years, and Brian gives us thoughts on it from the point of view of the beer industry at large. We're going to be talking more about this new category in upcoming episodes, both the hemp-derived side made legal by the 2018 Farm Bill and licensed cannabis drinks in states where recreational cannabis has been legalized and regulated through state-licensed dispensaries. As Brian mentions, the former is something individual states are looking to either regulate or crack down on significantly. And even since our conversation was recorded, California Governor Gavin Newsom has added his voice to that mix just days before this episode was published. It's an interesting inflection point for both the legal cannabis side and the hemp-derived side, which many believe needs uniform guidelines and restrictions to ensure both consumer safety as well as stable growth. Lastly, we talk about some of the Beer Institute's legislative priorities, which includes a new program aimed at making draft beer more accessible. We'll drink to that. And Brian shares some great info on how people can get involved in advocating for beer in all of its forms with their local representatives. Anyways, here's our conversation. All right. Brian Crawford has been the president and CEO of the Beer Institute since 2022, which represents the interests of the $400 billion beer industry in the U.S. Prior to that, he has served in various executive roles that support policymaking, most recently as Executive Vice President of Legislative Affairs for the American Hotel and Lodging Association, where he led the group's advocacy efforts on Capitol Hill. So, Brian, we're so glad to get your perspective today, and welcome to the U.S. of N.A.
John, thank you so much. Really pleased to be here with you.
So we'll go ahead and jump right into the question. So I know the Beer Institute represents the interest of everyone in the beer industry. And, just to put some context or some numbers against that, I mentioned at the top, it's a $400 billion industry here in the U.S. and employs almost 2.5 million people. So obviously a very significant economic driver in our economy. So just want to point that out since not everybody might be aware of that. Just curious as we get into it here, what are some of the top priorities you guys have right now in the near term?
Yeah, John, just a little bit of history on the BI, the Beer Institute. We were actually founded in 1862. We're one of the oldest trade associations in Washington, D.C. A group of brewers came together to oppose an excise tax increase to help fund the Civil War. And the United States Brewers Association was founded because of that. And what's funny is that our focus and our advocacy agenda hasn't changed all that much. Our focus continues to be, we want to allow for economic freedom. We want to see growth. We want to see competition within the space. And the best way to do that is to keep excise taxes low, to limit the amount of regulatory red tape that is placed upon brewers, especially those brewers that are just coming online, that are trying to grow within the industry. There are other inputs that we are concerned about, commodity inputs. Obviously, the cost of aluminum is hugely important. And we're spending a lot of time talking about health, responsibility, moderate consumption, and candidly, the growth and the strength of the NA market is helping to support the work that we're doing in that space. Another key priority for us around the tax space is obviously the R&D tax credit, which was part of the TCJA, the big tax cut package that was passed under President Trump. That is set to expire here in 2025. And that's a huge tool for brewers to use, particularly in the NA space. If you're manufacturing and you're using new technology to develop an NA beer, you want to take advantage of that tax credit. And so we want to make sure that R&D tax credit is extended next year. So another key priority for us.
Yeah, for sure. So you touched on health, and it's been an interesting couple of years. And I think there's a lot of trends that are influencing not just craft beer and beer in general and sales, but just driving a whole lot of other categories. I guess, with it being a little bit challenging out there, especially for some of the craft brewers after many years of just, pretty large growth that we were seeing. How do you think they're viewing the non-alcoholic sector in terms of being able to hopefully contribute to future growth?
Yeah, I think that the craft segment has now become a mature enterprise, right? They had explosive growth over the last 20 years. And generally what you see is when a segment becomes mature, there are oftentimes winners and losers. And those that are well-established tend to have longer staying power. I would hope that they would see NA as an area of growth. That is certainly where our brewers see it. We believe strongly that we want to be where the consumers are. And there are generational shifts that we're seeing with younger generations being much more health conscious, focusing on what they put in their bodies, the amount of exercise. And the NA category really provides an important tool for them, which is you can still have those amazing beer occasions, but without any alcohol. Moderation, the Beer Institute has long advocated for responsible consumption and everything in moderation. And what we're seeing now, one of the trends that we're seeing is you have a 5% beer and then you have an NA beer, right? And so it's a way for you to still be part of the celebration, still bring people together, but really limit the amount of alcohol that you're having. And we see this as a key driver for the beer industry moving forward. We see it as a point of differentiation. The reality is that younger generations who are health conscious, they want to substitute those high alcohol products for lower alcohol products, and beer is uniquely positioned to provide them with what they're looking for.
So you mentioned the younger demographics there in Generation Z, and I think the media, a lot of the headlines you see around those drinking trends for Gen Z and their health consciousness is around how they're driving the NA industry in terms of those beverages. And I think within the NA sector, a lot of the people we talk to there, both breweries as well as people in the broader non-alcoholic drink sector, report that it's not necessarily Gen Z who's buying their products right now. They're seeing it really across the spectrum of millennials, Gen X, boomers, the people who have a little bit more disposable income at this point. Certainly Gen Z and their attitudes toward, just health and drinking are driving that as well. But I'm just curious in the brewer side is, how does that match to what they're seeing? We know that Gen Z may have different attitudes toward drinking and just health in general, but, are they seeing that demographic shift in terms of sales?
Oh, yeah. But it's slow. I still view the NA category as a nascent category within the beer industry. Really, it's seen this explosive growth of 30 and 40% increase year over year, only over the last couple of years. And within the total segment of beer, it's still single digit percentage. So it is still small, but growing. I think that the demographic conversation is a fascinating one, and one that we're going to continue to monitor and trend. We have an economist here in-house that continues to follow those trend lines. I would expect to see that across all generations, you're going to see an uptick in NA consumption, but we're also seeing really strong numbers with our traditional products. All of our recent polling, consumer polling and consumer surveys show that beer continues to be the alcohol beverage of choice. And our brands are really incredibly well known in the marketplace. And so, again, our companies are viewing this as an opportunity to be where the consumer is. If you have a brand loyal consumer, whether it's with Constellation, with the Modelo brand, or Heineken, or Molson Coors, or Anheuser-Busch, you want to have them stay within your brand family. And if you want to have a full strength beer, or you want to have a light beer, or you want to have a session beer, or you want to have an NA beer, if they like your flavor profile, you want to keep them there. And so they see that as just an added benefit. The generational demographics, I think, are going to continue to evolve over the next 5 to 10 years. We'll have better data then, now that NA is much more well established. And we're seeing new NA brands come online every single day. And it's really remarkable. I asked my team to pull me some of the new ones that have just come about. And when you see, companies like, obviously Two Roads in Brooklyn and traditional sort of craft guys getting into the NA space, you can see what they're trying to do is meet their consumer where they are and keep them on their brand.
No, you're right. It certainly is a spectrum. And in fact, in our very last episode, we spoke with a new brewery. In fact, they just launched there in DC called Dad Strength Brewing, and they're going after kind of 2 to 3% beer. So you think about there's a little bit of a gap in the craft segment from about 4 to 5% down to NA. And they and others, I know Miller on the macro beer side, they have a product now that's, I think, 2.8% or somewhere in that range. So it's a spectrum of what people are looking for and having those different options for sure.
Did you talk the name of the brewery is Dad Strength?
It is called Dad Strength Brewing. Yes.
I love that. Yeah, I'm gonna get some of that.
There's innovation all over the place in this category. It's awesome to see. You were talking about the growth, and you referenced some numbers of 30 to 40%, which is what we've seen as well in terms of the growth of the category here in the U.S. We know in places like Germany and other countries in Europe, it's upwards of maybe 10% of the total market there. Is that something you think is realistic, or at least do your brewers think is realistic here in the U.S., or is that an apples to oranges comparison at this point?
I think it's a little bit of an apples to oranges comparison. It goes back to sort of the nascency of NA beer here in the United States. It is still in its infancy stages. And so it's hard to compare us to Germany, which is just such a renowned beer country. Not that the US isn't, but it's just so much more well established. And even our global brands that operate in Europe, particularly Heineken, have been investing in NA and 0.0 in Europe for decades, right? They're the number one sponsor of F1 races, and it's their 0.0 product, right? That's a big deal in Europe. That is arguably the most widely watched sporting event in Europe, aside from soccer, or football, I should say, which they also sponsor. So the level of investment is dwarfed here in the United States. And so you're going to see that become a larger point of emphasis moving forward. But again, it sort of goes back to what we talked about at the outset, that beer provides a unique opportunity for our consumer, where if you want a full strength beer, it's available to you. If you want a dad strength beer of 2 and 3%, it's now available to you. If you want a 0.0% beer, also available to you, and making sure that our consumers do not lose out on those occasions where they want to have a beer, but they don't want any alcohol. Just making sure that our members, our companies are meeting the consumers where they are is really a focus. I think 10% in 10 years, I don't know that that's not realistic. But again, we are really in the infancy stages when you look at the sort of the broad spectrum of where we are.
Right. So let's talk about the beverage market a little bit in general. So, as you were just saying, it's having a range of products is what people are looking for, and having those different options. And maybe they feel like having a full strength IPA one day, or, a light beer, or an NA or whatever, or mid strength beer at different times or different situations. We also know that the non-beer category, or beverages that are kind of like a beer but not exactly a beer, are taking off as well. And I think in particular, one area where that's the case would be in the hemp-derived category, where, as a result of, I think, the 2018 Farm Act, hemp-derived beverages below a certain proportion, became essentially allowed in an unregulated market, of course, but have become allowed and have become very common. And we have seen recently, one example here in the Atlanta area, I know Scofflaw Brewery has gotten into that game, not with a beer type product, since I think there's some legal issues that pertain to that, but they offer a lemonade, they offer, I think, a sweet tea that has THC, CBD in very small amounts that are part of that. How do you guys view that category? And do you think that's something that breweries, may look to participate more in as opportunities for growth?
It's a really interesting question. It's a complex one. I think you touched upon the Farm Bill back in 2018, where there was a provision that legalized hemp products, and it was legalized at the behest of then Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who obviously in Kentucky had a significant hemp growing operation. But it was designed to focus on industrial hemp, not consumer grade hemp. And what we've seen is this explosive growth of intoxicating hemp products across the country, which, to your point, are unregulated. It is like the Wild West. And in certain states, they're only allowed to be sold where there are dispensaries along with cannabis products. In other states, they are now being sold right next to the cold box, right across from beer. And so we are taking a very, very close look at this. Congress is taking a very close look at this. State attorneys general are taking a very close look at this. In particular, Congress had language in both the upcoming Farm Bill, which expires at the end of this year. It's not going to get done because Congress right now is truly inept and can't walk and chew gum at the same time. But they're going to address it in the next Farm Bill. There was language in the Farm Bill. There was language in the House Ag Appropriations Bill that funds the Department of Ag to close that intoxicating hemp loophole, right? So to say, if you're using hemp for industrial products, for knapsacks or whatever else, rope, that's fine. That's what it was intended. But if you're using it to create intoxicating products that are being sold at C-stores, at gas stations all across the country with no regulation behind it, without paying any excise tax and no responsibility market it, right? There's no way that this isn't getting in the hands of children, unlike alcohol products where you have to be 21, where you have to show an ID, where it is clearly stated on the outside packaging and on the label. These are all areas of real concern. And what we're seeing is that state attorneys general, 21 of them, bipartisan groups from all across the country, wrote to Congress earlier this year and said, this is a problem in our state. We're the chief law enforcement officers in the state. You, Congress, created this problem. You, Congress, need to fix it. And so I believe Congress is going to take that up, and I think that they wanted to get it done in the Farm Bill, but the Farm Bill has been slowed down because of partisan bickering and everything that's happening with the election. But it is an area of focus for Congress. It's an area of focus for law enforcement, and we're certainly monitoring.
Sure.
To date, we have not seen our member brewers enter into the space, largely because of this. There's just way too many unknowns. It's hard for us in a very highly regulated industry, both by the TTB and by the FDA, to jump into a completely unregulated space. That's just not how our companies operate. I think you're seeing it more around the fringes where entrepreneurs have seen an opportunity and have taken advantage of it. But I do believe that ultimately there will be a regulatory structure put in place, or they will be outright banned federally.
Well, that's encouraging to hear of those discussions, and hopefully, something can happen at the regulatory side to put some guidelines. I mean, I think what is at least a positive is within the non-alcoholic industry, particularly bottle shops. I'm not aware of any that are participating in that right now that, aren't putting their own guidelines against making sure they're not selling an intoxicating beverage with THC or CBD to a minor and treating those as if they're alcohol products, making sure they're labeled, people understand what they're buying when they're in the store. But certainly in the absence of having true regulation around that, somebody walks into a gas station, they're certainly not getting that level of service and understanding. And so it does create an environment that is concerning. And so I think, even for what it's worth, I do think even within the industry, within non-alcoholic bottle shops in particular, are hoping for that sort of regulation and to bring a little bit more control and process to what certainly doesn't exist there today.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, if you're a bottle shop owner and now you actually have to police these products, how is that fair? And in what world are you qualified to do so, right? I mean, our products, before they go to market, before they go to the shelves, are tested for quality standards. We know exactly what the ABV is, right? This has been around, since Prohibition. We know exactly what's going in there. There's no more days of selling hooch off the side, the street corner, right? But what we're seeing here is we're relying on an entrepreneur who's created a product to say, oh, I know exactly how much THC or how much Delta 8 or Delta 9 is in this product. But is that actually confirmed by a scientist? No. And now we're putting the onus on the shop owner to say, I need to regulate this because I'm concerned about the impacts. I mean, the whole system is a mess. It's the Wild West. And it's really unfortunate that Congress didn't have the foresight to address this sooner. I'm glad that state attorneys general are doing so. I mean, I think the latest state, Massachusetts, just took all of their products off the shelves. We're seeing state after state do this because they're finding real health impacts. Because unfortunately, as much as the bottle shop or the convenience store owner or the gas station owner is trying to regulate it, it is way outside their knowledge base to know exactly what's in these products. And so we need the federal government to step in. We need the state governments to step in the interim. And we are certainly urging Congress to move with expediency to address this crisis in some states.
To shift gears a little bit, to go back to some of your legislative priorities, wanted to talk about the Cheers Act a little bit, since I think we can all get behind draft beer as something that I think we all enjoy very much. And so would love to hear just why that's important. I know there's some sustainability concerns there as well. There's also, I think, some margin opportunities there as well with some of your participating brewers. So would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we're really excited about the Cheers Act, and much like the NA category, I would say in the legislative process, we are very much in the infancy stages, but we did get bipartisan legislation introduced in the House that would provide a tax credit under 179D for any venue, restaurant, bar, hotel, brew pub, anywhere where you have draft lines. If you're going to install new draft lines or update your draft lines, you would be eligible for this tax credit. And what we were looking at was post-pandemic, draft beer is down still 15 to 20% nationally. And in urban markets like where I am here in DC, you have restaurants that went under during the pandemic and have not come back, or if they have come back, have not brought back their draft systems because they laid fallow for too long and it's expensive to upkeep your draft lines. And so if we could get some incremental growth to draft, it would benefit beer, but it would also benefit our partners at the on-premise, the off-premise that continue, sadly, to struggle post-pandemic. And so this legislation is simple. It would just provide the tax credit. The tax credit would accrue to the actual location where the draft lines are installed. And we think that it makes a lot of sense. And there's going to be a lot of conversation around taxes coming into 2025. This would be a very small tax provision that would provide great help to the hospitality industry and to all of our partners. You also touched upon the fact that draft beer is the most sustainable and energy efficient source of beer. It's also the freshest source of beer. And, when you go to your local bar, you have a draft beer. If the draft system is up to date and has been done well, it is the best beer you can possibly have. And so we think that this makes a lot of sense on a lot of levels. We're now focused on getting a Senate companion bill introduced, growing the number of co-sponsors. We're above 20 co-sponsors already in the House. And so our hope is that this can be part of the conversation here in 2025 and 2026. But it's also a great unifier for the beer industry, whether or not you're a craft brewer, you're a macro brewer, whether or not you have a brew pub or a large venue, everyone's eligible for this tax credit. And it's just a very small incentive to get our hospitality partners back on their feet And it's also eligible for, think about it, Dunkin' Donuts for their cold brew, they use a Micrometric craft system or draft system. Ciders would be eligible for it. Wine in draft would be eligible for it. So there's no discriminatory aspect to it. It is available to everyone. We see this as a real positive. We're excited about it.
Well, great. I was going to add, I think selfishly within the NA sector, and we've talked about this on my show quite a bit with different people, there's a lot of excitement around NA beer on draft. And there's some additional challenges. Alcohol acts as a natural preservative. It's a little bit different when you have even a slight, under 0.5 NA, which most of them are in the US. There's still some extra steps that need to be followed to make sure that it stays safe. But, if you do those things, it can in fact be safe. And so I don't know if that's something that we need to be at the regulatory level or legislative level, or if it's more of an industry standard or maybe a combination of both. But I know there's a lot of hope in the industry. I think that would certainly help not just the NA-only brewers, but certainly this is a movement that all brewers are participating in at this point, or a lot of them. And if they can be able to sell more of their beer on draft, I think that's certainly a good thing for the entire industry.
Totally agree. And it goes back to one of the first things I talked about, that R&D, research and development tax credit. The onus would be placed upon the brewers to develop the technology that's necessary to keep that beer fresh on draft. I don't think it would be a regulatory regime that would solve it for us, though. TTB might be able to, provide some expertise. But at the end of the day, this is something that the brewers are going to figure out. And that's why that R&D tax credit is so important, because you can use those funds to help make sure that the NA draft is preserved and pours the way that you want it.
Right. Yeah. Before we let you go, speaking of kind of the regulatory side, I know you guys are operating at the federal level, working to obviously, make things better for the entire industry and the consumers that enjoy the industry. I know there's I think NA beer has maybe brought to the forefront a few situations that were inadvertent, or just unfortunate situations just based on how a lot of different state laws work. And as one example of that, here in Georgia, I know breweries are not able to sell other breweries' beer, which I think, has something to do with the wholesale and other, more economic parts of the industry. But I think from a safety standpoint, especially as people are trying to be more health conscious, it'd be great if my local brewery, if they're not at the point of making an NA beer, could at least serve athletic, or maybe a locally made or regionally made NA beer in cans to at least to some of those patrons who may want to come in and have a few regular beers, but they have to drive 20 minutes back home and they want to be safe about it, or maybe they just have a busy day the next day and don't want to stay longer, but they still want to spend money, at that particular brewery. So I think our hope is that, as the NA sector becomes more significant, it becomes more mature, that, there's some impetus to change some of that. And it may not be at the federal level, it may need to happen at the state level, but hopefully some of those things would then fall into place.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and one where the 3-tier system that was established after Prohibition has allowed for this explosive growth of the industry for beverage alcohol, both within beer, but wine and spirits. But it also creates some inequities on the state level. And what we see is a patchwork of state laws where we're highly regulated at the federal level. We're also highly regulated at the state level, and states have a lot of leeway to determine how best to regulate their alcohol market, as seen by control states and by these sort of strange relics of old law. What you say makes complete and total sense. If you're at a local brew pub and they do not yet have the capabilities to brew NA, well, you should have other options available. It's just part of responsible and moderate consumption. And so my advice to you and to those of you that are in the beer industry and love NA beers in the state of Georgia, become activist citizens and make sure that you're lobbying the governor's office and whatever state entity regulates the alcohol market, because that just seems misguided in my opinion. So you're going to see, you're seeing a lot of activity at the state and local level as it relates to beverage alcohol regulation. You're seeing blurring of lines where a wine company is the largest producer of canned cocktails, beer companies that are getting involved in canned cocktails, liquor companies that are buying beer companies. So there's a lot of activity that's happening both globally, but here in the United States, and then a lot of activity at the federal and state level to modernize our laws. Now, unequivocally, we support the 3-tier system, and we think that it has been a remarkable system to allow for growth of our industry. But over time, things need to be updated, and it sounds like that's the situation in Georgia.
Right, for sure. Well, before we let you go, anything else that you want to share with our listeners, who we know include a lot of brewers? So there's definitely some constituents, some of your employees from the category or the industry here. Anything else you want to share in terms of what you guys are focused on or working on for them?
We have every year we prioritize our issues and make sure that we are focused on those issues that impact brewers' bottom lines. Taxes on keeping excise taxes low is always a priority. Making sure that moderation, responsible consumption, and that the entities that govern the dietary guidelines, that they take a reasonable perspective on those things, and making sure that any changes to the dietary guidelines for alcohol consumptions are based upon a preponderance of science. That's a huge priority for us. Making sure that our commodity partners, whether it's hops, barley growers, get the support that they need through the Farm Bill. That's a priority. And all of that information can be found on our website, beerinstitute.org. We also last year launched an advocacy website called Stand With Beer. And this is one-stop shopping, which talks about the economic benefits of beer. So when we talk about the 2.4 million employees that the beer industry supports, more than $400 billion, it can distill that information down to congressional districts. So you're in, let's just say for argument's sake, you're in Georgia 3. If you're going to talk to your congressman or even your state legislature, that information can be found where you can tell them exactly how many beer jobs are in that district, how much taxes are paid, how many employees, all of that information. So it's really helpful in that regard. It also talks about some of the unfair treatment, we believe, the liquor industry, some of the unfair benefits that the liquor industry currently receives under federal tax law. So programs like IRC 5010, which provides a tax credit for liquor producers that flavor their products. So if you produce cotton candy vodka, you get a tax credit. It seems insane to me. Duty drawback, the rum cover-over program, all of which are relics of a long time ago that provide unfair treatment to other segments of beverage alcohol compared to the liquor industry. Those need to be reformed. And so all of that information is available to consumers and to beer advocates on standwithbeer.org.
Well, Brian, we really appreciate you joining us today. Really appreciate your engagement and talking about and diving into non-alcoholic beer. It's exciting to hear about the things you guys are working on. I know it's a little bit of a chaotic time in Washington right now as we're all looking ahead to the election, and I'm sure you guys are kind of doing your planning ahead based on, which of two administrations will be in power starting next January. So really appreciate you joining us, and look forward to seeing how all this plays out.
Yeah, John, I appreciate you having me. And the good news for beer is that beer is a non-partisan issue. Everyone loves beer. And so we're in good position whether or not we have a Trump 2.0 or a Harris administration. So we're ready to go.
Well, amen to that. That's good to hear. All right, Brian. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
Many thanks again to Brian for coming on the show. We plan to have him back at some point, maybe to talk about beer and changes in dietary guidelines, as well as updates on what we covered this time around. In the meantime, we've got some great interviews coming up, including with one of the OG advocates of the non-alcoholic sector. And as I alluded to at the top of the show, we have a couple of episodes coming up to talk about the cannabis-infused beverage market. Until then, enjoy the changing leaves out there, and cheers.